This podcast is a member of the Place to Be Nation family. Visit us at placetobenation.com, the only place to be in your pop culture world.
Welcome to the Marvel Age Masterclass podcast with host Ben Morse. Episode 3, 1964, Part 1, with guest Todd Weber.
Place to Be Nation, welcome back to another exciting, thrilling, Titanic episode of Marvel Age Masterclass. My name is Ben Morse. I used to be the editorial director of digital media over at Marvel Entertainment. I am now a visiting professor at UNLV in beautiful Las Vegas, Nevada, the entertainment capital of the world, where I am coming to you taped from my backyard. My dog is chilling out, the sun's in the air, everything's beautiful. And speaking of beautiful, I have on the line with me a beautiful man, just a beacon of hope and light. That would be Todd Weber. Good morning, Todd.
Good morning, Ben. Flattery will get you everywhere. How are you?
I'm doing great, man. I'm excited to talk a little more Marvel. You guys had an epic episode not too long ago covering 1964, which we're going to start talking about today. You guys really got into it. I think the thing about 64 that's fascinating to me is, and you guys touched on it in Marvel Age, and of course, if you guys aren't listening to the Marvel Age podcast, that is the sister podcast to Masterclass, and we're actually, as I like to say, the show that analyzes the show that's analyzing the Marvel Universe year by year. So definitely listen to the Mothership Marvel Age Masterclass and then come back, or the Mothership Marvel Age podcast and then come back here. But yeah, 64 is interesting because 63... as I talked with Tim Capel on my last episode, a lot of it's kind of like 60, 61, 62, Stan, Jack, and Steve create Fantastic Four and Spider-Man, a couple other characters, but mainly Fantastic Four and Spider-Man, which gives them the latitude in 1963 to really start stretching their legs and introducing a lot of cool concepts and characters. And to me, the interesting thing here is they're really building this huge shared universe. 63, a lot of disparate elements get introduced. The X-Men, the Avengers, Iron Man, a few others.
Doctor
Strange, of course. Thank you. And then 64, a couple of things happen that are interesting. Number one, they start pulling the elements together and showing you why the Marvel Universe is going to be different than any other comics universe you've seen. Of course, I mean, going back to the Golden Age, there were crossovers, there were things going on in terms of, Superman meeting Batman, Captain America meeting Namor, things like that. But the Marvel Universe was unique in that it really projected the idea of all these characters live in the same city, and this is not just, you can read any of these series, you can read Amazing Spider-Man, you can read Strange Tales on their own, but you're really, there's an ongoing story of a universe being built. There's a lot of parallels to the way Marvel's done their film slate over the last 10 years. And in 1964, we start seeing the building blocks of that universe, that shared universe, as well as a lot of great and not so great villains and supporting characters start making it into the mix to interact with our heroes. So that's kind of where we kick off. So before we got into some specific stuff, Todd, I wanted to just get your take on 64, kind of your broad thoughts. I know obviously you shared a lot on the Marvel Age podcast, but what did you think of 64 and what the fledgling creators of the Marvel Universe were doing?
Ben, I agree with you. It was truly an opportunity for them to showcase and strengthen the universe by having such and such character guest star in such and such book and promoted as such. I think it was also a big year for developing the rogues galleries of these teams.
Yes.
Fantastic Four, Avengers, X-Men, Spider-Man. You saw the rogues multiply, and you got a lot of repeat villains too, but you were able to build on that, and we'll talk about that certainly. But as far as the building of the universe, absolutely you saw that. And if you were a kid, or even anyone who was collecting these books, you would want to pick up the complementary adventure of that character because you felt you were in on it from the beginning. You know, this was all a part of a shared universe. And I have no idea what the cost of living was, but it just seems so cheap. Like, I could have $1 and I could have 8 comics that per month, for $1. I just don't understand the economics with my caveman mind, but
right.
To me that
Nor
just
is
seems
anybody
like
asking you to.
such an amazing thing to be experiencing from the ground floor if you were there.
Yeah, absolutely, and yeah, like you said, it's really the idea now is we have the core personalities of some of these Marvel mainstays built up. We're going to talk about a few new characters tonight, a couple headliners, but mostly a lot of, as you said, rogues and, like I said, supporting cast. And they start trickling in. They start to have some ideas. And the interesting thing I want to talk about in contrast, I want to start, as you guys did, with Tales of Suspense, which to me, I want to get your take on Tales of Suspense, because when Tim and I talked about it last episode, I said it's fascinating to me that Iron Man has become as successful as he has in terms of multimedia success, in terms of popularity in the comics. Because to me, Iron Man was always kind of an also-ran of the Marvel Universe. He wasn't one of the main eventers, so to say. And I talked about this a little last time, but I think he almost became Marvel's top movie star out of necessity, in the sense that they had sold off the rights to get out of bankruptcy to X-Men, Fantastic Four, and of course Spider-Man, most of all. And Iron Man was just, one of the guys they had left over. And I think the brilliant vision of the people at Marvel, combined with Robert Downey Jr. just being the perfect selection to play Iron Man, really revitalized the character and made people see, what was cool about him. The thing is, there's got to be something there to work with. They didn't just pull Iron Man out of thin air in 2008. There was foundational stuff. And I think Iron Man was... I've thought about this a little since I talked to Tim, and I think in many ways Iron Man was a character somewhat ahead of his time. And I'm talking about Tony Stark specifically as, the wealthy, industrialist, playboy who's very successful, and his flaws come later. I think he's really a character who you look at the best Iron Man stories, and I think he flourished a lot before the best Iron Man stories before the modern age. I think he flourished in the 80s, the era of greed, when corporate stories were very interesting and when they would really get into his character. But reading about him, this early stuff of Tony Stark in the 60s, he seems like an odd fit into the Marvel universe. It almost seems like even one step beyond the pale, where you have relatable Peter Parker who makes mistakes but overcomes them. You've got Thor, his complexity, and the fact that Thor, something we don't talk about a lot is the fact that all the Marvel characters have flaws. Thor, to me, his flaw was his arrogance. And that's why he was banished to Earth, because he was just an arrogant character. But Tony Stark, to me, Iron Man, is the one character who kind of goes beyond. He's flawed in almost an unforgivable way, in the sense that he's a weapons manufacturer, and he's just not much of a likable guy. And I think they try to ground him through his supporting cast of Happy Hogan and Pepper Potts. I don't think it's as successful as, say, Spider-Man and his supporting cast, or even Thor with Jane Foster and the Asgardians. But I'm curious to get your thoughts on Iron Man and where he fits in this early Marvel pantheon.
To me, Tony Stark specifically, or Anthony Stark as he's still known in these tales, he's not likable. And I'm trying to think, if you're a kid or a young reader or teenager reading this, and the appeal for him is not necessarily, well, I can see myself in him. I can see my qualities in him. You see the aspirational life. You see the sports cars and the mansion and all, and the travel, and just him being the handsomest man in the world as well. So yeah. You covet him. You want to be like him. But with his flaws and with his morality of being, they weren't so heavy-handed with the arms dealer stuff then.
Sure.
As far as, this is making you a morally ambiguous character, as like we got in the Iron Man film. where he has that moment like, what am I doing? He's
right.
kind of hasn't changed a whole lot of apart from, I've got this suit, I've got to use it, I've got to stop. I have this ability to both protect my corporate interests and stop evil, vaguely Asian dictators who with powers and rings that don't necessarily aren't well defined just yet. So I think he fits in that he's different, and he's certainly the cool character as far as you're looking, if you were a kid looking at, that would be the popular guy. That would be the guy I wish I looked like and had the secretary swooning for. But he's not necessarily likable. He's just cool. He's kind of like I'm trying to think like another version of him in a different company. But I'm like Reggie from the Archies. He was cool, but he was rich, but that was all he had to him.
Sure.
Iron Man, the character, though, the costume was evolving. It was better looking at this point, even though it was drawn inconsistently sometimes. The mask and his powers were coming along, but it was less bulky. It was more stylish and flashy. And like you said, the red and yellow was very striking and different from anything else. So I think he was cool, but I don't think his sales were what books like the FFs were or Spider-Man's were.
Right. Certainly enough to keep afloat. But yeah, I don't think he was a runaway hit. But I mean, the interesting thing again is he never went away. It wasn't like the Hulk where he flamed out after 6 issues. He was a consistent presence. You alluded to a character who I want to touch on briefly, and that of course being Mandarin, who to this day really is considered Iron Man's arch villain. I say that with kind of a shakiness in my voice because I wonder if he hasn't been supplanted historically by the likes of Obadiah Stane or some of these other rival businessmen who would come along.
Yeah,
Justin Hammer, of course, who'd come along later. And then you see, I think it's interesting again in the Iron Man movies, they never really did the Mandarin. In some ways, you couldn't do the Mandarin, just in the way he's such a dated character, and it's interesting to me that with everything that was going on in the Marvel Universe at this time, with all the hits we had as far as the villainous side of things, the Doctor Dooms, the Magnetos, all the rogues that Spider-Man was facing, Loki, these great villainous characters, and then you come to the Mandarin, and he's always to me been the least of the big Marvel villains. He is considered an A-list Marvel villain. I think whenever they have a big event, the Mandarin's involved. Like I think back specifically to Acts of Vengeance.
I was going to say the same thing.
Yeah, yeah, where they gathered all the A-list Marvel villains, and the Mandarin was there. On the surface, cool powers. The rings doing different things are kind of neat. They didn't utilize them fully in these early appearances as much as they would later on, but I don't know. I think obviously what holds the Mandarin back is that he doesn't have the complexity of a Doom or a Magneto where there's some sort of three-dimensional thing to him. He really is just a cackling villain. In many ways, he's the most, I don't intend to use DC as an insult because, of course, we have love and respect for the distinguished competition, but Mandarin was as close to a DC villain as Marvel had, really. He was a guy who was just concerned with taking over the world with greed and power. He was not fleshed out. He was not fully realized. And I think, to that point, it was a lot where Iron Man represented the American industrial complex. That was kind of his thing. So it made sense that he would be most in opposition to this kind of Eastern, more ground level philosophy. But I don't know. Some of my favorite Mandarin stories are ironically from the 90s when Iron Man was probably at his worst. But I think they did some interesting stuff with the Mandarin when they had him get back to the idea of, mystical Eastern philosophy versus Western technology. But even that didn't last for very long. So I don't know. The Mandarin to me is just, we talked about the Hulk being kind of a swing and a miss early on until they tweaked him. To me, the Mandarin is the first of the big Marvel villains who for whatever reason, has endured to this day, but really just doesn't have a lot to him.
Yeah, I agree greatly, and I think it's easy to just imagine the Mandarin character in a book, say like Justice League. That's an easy comparison. He didn't have, racism and stereotypes aside, he didn't have that much of a compelling character, or the best villains to me are the ones you can almost sympathize with, you can empathize with, and he was kind of just generically red. He was the red. I use that prefix a lot. So is that McCarran Airport? I hear
that would be, yes. You would hear McCarran Airport in the background. Thank you for pointing that out.
Cool. I as a veteran of podcasting from the great outdoors, I know these noises. So
of course, yeah. It adds a lot of flavor,
It does. Yeah, I used to have the signature of birds tweeting when I would podcast with my iPad in the backyard. But
nice.
So Mandarin himself, I wish they had retconned him a lot sooner, but
right.
He kind of put a face, unfortunately, inaccurately as it was, on the Vietnam conflict. And that was the era we were riding at. And Joe Public didn't really know all of the stuff going on in Vietnam. The CIA involvement, the heroin trade, all the crazy... and it wasn't until the movies of the 80s and we go, oh, that's what Vietnam was really like. And so it served a purpose, but you could easily see him, and we see it with the Crimson Dynamo later, you could see Iron Man up against the Soviets more easily. That was a better, well-defined threat, and I think that's where they should have been going at this point in time. But I think those issues of the Mandarin, Iron Man versus Mandarin we looked at were important in that we saw the development, or at least the introduction of Happy Hogan and Pepper Potts. And as one-dimensionally as they were back then, caricatures still important, and they're hugely important to Iron Man to this day in the movies. So,
and in the comics as well. I think Pepper Potts is probably, you look at some of the female Marvel characters from the 60s, and we're actually going to talk today about one of the female characters who I think is arguably one of the more well-developed in a second. But, Pepper Potts has developed into a great character in the Iron Man mythos. Again, partially because of the movie, but also just because they matured her and made her a fully realized character. I think with her, with Happy Hogan, I think the interesting thing about Iron Man is Iron Man gets reinvented every decade or so, which makes sense because the character lends itself to that. He's always got to be on the cutting edge of technology. So whether that's, David Michelini and Bob Layton, or the guys in the 90s coming in, or of course Warren Ellis coming in and doing the big thing with the Extremis, and then Matt Fraction, et cetera, et cetera. Iron Man is a character who evolves a lot, but I think the most interesting thing is that his villains and supporting cast evolve a lot as well. Tony Stark, there is, kind of a baseline personality and development to him, but I think over the years they have done something with Pepper Potts, and I credit Matt Fraction a lot for really bringing Pepper Potts to life in the pages of Invincible Iron Man, whether she was rescued or whether she was on her own. But just to put a bow on the Mandarin, I think the interesting thing about the Mandarin is I literally think every Iron Man writer who comes on Iron Man, and I say this both as an observer and someone who has spoken to guys who write Iron Man and girls who write Iron Man, I think everyone who comes on Iron Man feels this obligation to try to make the Mandarin work, because Mandarin is the most enduring, alongside Crimson Dynamo and Titanium Man and a few others. But Mandarin really is, again, he's the iconic Iron Man villain. And I think everyone tries to make the Mandarin work in some way, whether that is in the 90s doing the mysticism angle, or Fraction, again, you can tell I'm a fan of Fraction's Iron Man run, but Fraction did some great stuff with the Mandarin. And I think people just, they want the Mandarin to be good, but the problem with the Mandarin is that there's not a lot there to build with. I think with some of these characters and concepts, like I look at the X-Men, or I look at the Hulk, or I look at a couple other characters we're going to talk about in a sec, there's something there in the bones for later writers and artists to seize upon. It might not have been fully realized, whether it's the Hulk as this tragic monster figure that didn't get fully explored in his first 6 issues, or the X-Men being this metaphor for racial discrimination, which wasn't there at the very beginning, but was ingrained pretty quickly. With the Mandarin, I just don't think there's enough there that people can try as they might, and there have been some great Mandarin stories. I just don't think there's a lot to the Mandarin. And I think my last thought I'll say on the Mandarin is I just think it's very telling that if you consider one of the greatest Iron Man runs of all time, Michelini and Layton, they didn't really touch on the Mandarin. They didn't use him a whole lot. They tended to go with the business rivals, with the Stains, with the Hammers, and they kind of stayed away from Mandarin. But I just think at the end of the day, you can tell some good Mandarin stories, but he's never going to be in that upper echelon of Marvel villains.
Don't forget Michelini, Layton. They introduced the classic villains, Jack Daniels and Jim Beam, to the Iron Man. And I grew up where that was one of the first issues I'd ever seen of Iron Man on the stands, and that classic Demon in a Bottle cover. Yeah. Almost not cliche, but it's iconic. But the first Iron Man I read and bought was actually James Rhodes in the Secret Wars era. So with the McDonnell Aikens art, I think was the time. So I think with Iron Man they try every few years and to change him up. We had teen Tony Stark. We had the Heroes Reborn Iron Man. But like you said, the tech aspect lends itself to that. I mean, you're upgrading every so years. The Extremis
you have to.
arcs are great. But until RDJ came by, I think that was the final domino to tip for him becoming a top tier character. It's ironic to me that the movies succeeded with him in a way that the comics to me never really did, even though I read him and enjoyed him. But this genius casting and the work put in by Downey Jr. to just make it work informs old reading of Iron Man now too. It's kind of hard to dissociate the two, and we've talked about this on shows before on the Rank and File we did together. Just how impactful that casting was. So Iron Man was there, and he was certainly written well here. But in the Avengers, I think he kind of fit better to me. I liked his interactions, especially when Cap joined the team until they blew it up in '65. So good stuff.
Yeah. Before we leave Iron Man behind, let's talk really quick, and then we'll segue into Avengers. 2 characters who would become Avengers mainstays to the point where they made it to the first movie roster. And I'm going to say that I will take you guys to task a little bit on your treatment specifically of Hawkeye on Marvel Age.
Wasn't me.
I think there was a lot of bagging on Hawkeye to the point, where the knock on Hawkeye from the other guys on Marvel Age was, well, man, he comes off as so dumb. And then he becomes a villain because of a misunderstanding. He's following Black Widow along with these puppy dog eyes because he's in love with her, and he gets tricked into it. I would argue that the very things that were criticized about Hawkeye on the Marvel Age episode are the things that make Hawkeye work in a modern context. And that being that he really is the everyman hero of the Marvel Universe. If you look at Peter Parker as being the most relatable teen hero, I really see Clint Barton as being kind of the adult that you can relate to, in the sense that he's not the smartest guy on the block. He has a very simple, not even power set, but skill set in terms of being good at archery. But just even the stuff right there from his first appearance. This is another one where I would argue that even if he wasn't a hit from his first appearance, they laid down elements that would make Hawkeye popular in the future. And I think the idea that, yes, he falls in love very easily, I think that is endearing. I think it's something a lot of us can relate to. The idea that he wants to be a hero so badly, but just, bad luck changes circumstances, and he ends up being miscast as a villain, which doesn't last long. But I don't know. I think a lot of good stuff was done in those initial Hawkeye stories that, through dumb luck or whatever, I think his creators stumbled backwards into a pretty good character. And I think Hawkeye is an immensely popular character today, in the movies, in the comics, everywhere. And I think, I don't think he's changed that much since his first appearance. He's not the brightest guy, but man, he's just got such a good heart, and he's so likable, and he wants to do the right thing. And I think you get behind Hawkeye for that reason. He's not aspirational like Tony Stark. He's not necessarily the guy you want to be, but he's very much like, he's the guy you'd want to have as your cool uncle, or the guy you want to hang out with at a barbecue. And I think some of that was there from the start. Black Widow was just a femme fatale straight out of Central Casting, the Russian menace personified. And I think it would take many years before anything interesting was done with the Black Widow. Honestly, I don't think she became particularly interesting until she got into Daredevil years later. But yeah, I don't know. You played the mea culpa and said that you didn't diss on Hawkeye in the Marvel Age episode. So here's your opportunity, Todd, to give your thoughts on Hawkeye and Black Widow.
Well, I mean, I was specifically criticizing that Hawkeye had a lab. Hawkeye should have a workshop.
I agree with you 100%. Everything I just said about Hawkeye being like, the man of the people and everything. Not every superhero needs a friggin' laboratory. They're not all scientists. My God, man.
So that was my criticism, but
fair criticism. I agree with you.
The way I'm talking about this is still Stan Lee writing. Hawkeye's bones are there. He does grow a lot over the years as far as the way, he joins up. We're future casting here, but he joins up with the other ambiguous criminals in the later incarnations of the Avengers, but he eventually becomes a leader type, both in Avengers, West Coast Avengers, and Thunderbolts. So this is kind of the self-made man to me. This is all his ingenuity, and say, well, I can do this all by myself, but boy, I wish I was more appreciated or more liked. I wish we had seen a little bit more of his story of how he had become a good archer in the first place. We just see him he's kind of in the sideshow or in the circus, and it's a pretty boring act, to be honest. He's just doing trick shots, and there's no flair, no flamboyance. So the costume works for me a little bit. I don't like the giant H, but they fixed that pretty quickly. The blue highlights don't necessarily work. And Clint, we let him fall in love with the generic Black Widow. Black Widow at this point, like you said, we could slap another name on her and it would be just as useful, because she's not recognizable as the Natasha Romanoff that we know from 40 years, 50 years in Marvel at this point. So I think this issue is more important for him, even though she had been there they are. There's the birds.
Yeah, they're the birds.
He is not the dastardly villain who wants to kill. He just wants attention, or he wants to, hey, here's my spotlight.
Yeah, absolutely. So those are two future Avengers. Let's transition over to Avengers the title, which, as I said on the last episode, to me, Avengers, when it first started out, those first few issues was almost, this is going to sound very harsh, but it was almost the most soulless of the Marvel books, because it was the most transparently just like, oh, let's take all our big characters and put them together in one book. And, it was cool seeing them interact, and they did anything, but it wasn't doing anything revolutionary. It wasn't reinventing the wheel like Fantastic Four did in terms of completely showing a team dynamic that had never been shown before. It wasn't even doing what X-Men did, where I think X-Men had a really interesting, those early X-Men issues, I'm getting a new appreciation for, as I think you guys are, for how just kind of quirky and weird they were. Avengers was, I'm not going to say it was a cash grab, but, in many ways it was the most obvious book to do. And it feels like there's not a lot of depth to it for those first couple issues. You have, some cool Thor and Loki stuff in the first issue, but immediately you go to the second issue and they're fighting the Space Phantom, and it's just pretty uninspired stuff. It felt like Lee and Kirby were not particularly motivated on Avengers. That changes drastically, as you guys covered in great depth and very well, in issue 4 with the reintroduction of Captain America, who completely changes the dynamic of the Avengers. Suddenly, you have this compelling character who, because of his pedigree, because he is a star of the Golden Age, can stand toe-to-toe with Iron Man, with Thor, probably stand this is a bad pun, but can stand above Giant Man. But just like this really great character. But the cool thing about putting it into context of the time was Avengers was the only place you were going to see Captain America. He did not have his own book at this point. That's what made him unique among the Avengers. All the other Avengers had their own book. Captain America was exactly the spark plug that Stan and Jack needed to make them care about the Avengers. Now suddenly there was a compelling character at the center of the book. And I think it was a masterstroke on their part, not just to, it would have been easy to bring Cap back. I mean, they both worked on Captain America. Jack Kirby was his co-creator. Stan Lee did his first professional work on Captain America. And just, bring him back, pop him into the Avengers, have Bucky with him, and just find a way to make it work. That would have been fine. The reinvention of Steve Rogers as Captain America is what makes him sing. And specifically what I'm referring to is that when he was around in the 30s and 40s, 50s even, Captain America was, a happy-go-lucky, Nazi-smashing character, rah, 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 America, root him on and smile and stuff. But when they bring him back in the Avengers, he is a tragic figure. The man out of time element is the coolest thing about Captain America. The idea that he does not fit in this world anymore. He was literally, in World War II, the perfect specimen of America. He was the dream guy that everybody wanted to be. Now, you bring him back into the Avengers, and still, everyone, the public is all like, oh, great, we're so excited Captain America's back, gives the Avengers credibility, everybody loves him. But those scenes, those quiet scenes of him in his room at Avengers Mansion, and I don't know if they got to them, they get to them specifically later on, just the idea that he's mourning the loss, not only of Bucky. Bucky is kind of emblematic for the world he has lost. He has not just lost his best friend, his sidekick, his partner, but he is really, everything he knew is gone. And he's thrust into this world where so much is expected of him. And so much is demanded of him. It's like he has to be Captain America. He has to be on. When they brought Namor back, it wasn't the same thing. No one expects anything of Namor. He's this roguish character and he's unstable. But Captain America, everyone is looking at him, including his Avengers teammates, you're a living legend. Do this for us. And when he's out in the field throwing his shield, for an unnecessary rhyme, he is, he's able to live and he's able to be happy, to be strong. But the minute he stops moving, there's a real tragedy and there's a real weight to this character. And I think there's more to it than a lot of people are just like, oh, that was smart that they brought back a popular character, put him in Avengers, that made Avengers work. No, I think they reinvented Captain America, and Stan and Jack's take on him would inform the character more so than his Golden Age appearances.
There's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I kind
okay.
of just went and I was just staring at the trees and I'm like, you know what? I have a lot to say about Captain America. Who knew?
What do you think about this being maybe one of the most 5 important Marvel comics ever published? Would you say?
I think it's very important because
at least as far as what we've talked about at this point.
As far as what you guys have talked about at this point, I think, you've got to look at Fantastic Four #1, you've got to look at Amazing Fantasy, but I think after those 2 issues, this very well may be one of the most important Marvel comics ever published, because I think without the introduction of Captain America, I don't know that Avengers lasts. I don't have sales figures in front of me. I'm sure it was doing fine, but in the same way the X-Men flamed out and would not make it through the 70s until they had a major reinvention, I think you could have seen that with the Avengers, if not for the introduction of Captain America. And I think the important thing to touch upon is not only did it commercially, not only was it a commercial success to bring Captain America back, I think creatively, as I alluded to, I think it's what kept Stan and Jack motivated on Avengers, to the point where you guys will talk about it on 65, where they do blow up the team, and they're willing to experiment and like, okay, we're finding ways to make Avengers work. But I think Captain America was what kept them going.
Well, you have right from the get-go the natural leader that everyone will defer to, so you don't have a democracy necessarily anymore, where it's just I'll do this and you do this and it'll work out. I think it's easier to write from this perspective, and you have this symbolic leader everybody looks up to, but in the other way, it makes all the other characters on the team a little more interesting in the way they interact with Cap too. I mean,
absolutely,
this great tweak to the book that changed it and plussed it tremendously, because you're able to put a personification of the team, and Cap got his own solo tales or backup tales in the anthology books here coming up pretty soon too, about a year or so from here. But this was the only place you were going to see him. The comic itself, the story itself, has stuff I really like. I like the brooding of Captain America and the tragic man out of time stuff. He is really hung up on Bucky dying at this point, and I think that was them overdoing it so that he would respond to Rick Jones and have the resurrection moment, or the resolve build up in him. So I think they overplay it, and some of the stuff with Namor and the I forget the Iroquois. I forget the name of the tribe.
The Inuits.
Inuits. There it is. Pretty sketchy.
It's brutal. Brutal. I mean, this is not. You got to give a lot of stuff a pass in these early Marvel books, or not. You don't have to give it a pass, but it's hard to read for sure.
Even some of the dialogue between Ant-Man / Giant Man, Iron Man, some of it is not. Is interchangeable, and that's something we criticize DC's Justice League for.
Sure,
but here we're seeing it a little bit, but it will get better over time. And this issue is all about Cap, and if you look at it from that lens and the story that they're telling with Cap, it kind of redeems quite a bit. So I was a little down on this after going back and reading it for so much, and focusing on the ridiculous stuff about it, but its historical perspective, the way it fixed the Avengers, and my God, it's one of the best covers to this day.
Amazing.
I mean, I published the Alex Ross kind of redo of this, and I looking at it, I still think I prefer the Jack Kirby.
I tell you, man, I really think we've talked about it in past episodes, but when you can tell the difference between when Kirby is on and he's kind of doing something he loves, as opposed to Kirby phoning in a little bit. And Captain America, clearly one of Kirby's favorite designs, and why not? Just a wonderful costume. Visually, one of the best, in my opinion, of the Marvel characters. And created so early on, but I think just that cover is great. The art really starts to sing. We're going to see Avengers kind of pick up in the near future, because now they've got something to rally around. But yeah, I think I don't think you're understating it by saying this was one of the most important comics of the early Marvel era, for sure. And I think retrospectively, looking at what Marvel has become today, where Captain America and the Avengers have become such central characters to the Marvel universe, again, I think if we don't have this injection here, we don't have it happen. And it's just, we've credited Stan and Jack with a lot of stuff, Steve as well, but Stan and Jack have done some really impressive stuff, whether it was the personalities of the Fantastic Four, or creating mutants as kind of a cheat to get around character origins, little things like that. But I think the reintroduction of Captain America is right up there.
This character, the man out of time thing, is so genius, because it always works. It's deeper than even I think Stan was talking about. I mean, this is saying something very profound that I don't know that he's necessarily making that commentary intentionally, but the subtext for me is I can read it and relate to is so strong. I think the character, again, if we talk about the modern casting of it, Chris Evans personifies Cap pretty well. I grew up in an era where I lived in Folsom, California, and Folsom is has the Folsom Prison and has Folsom Dam. And when I was a little boy, 6 to 8 years old or so, they were filming the Captain America TV movie, CBS movie.
Oh, no kidding.
At the dam. So I got to see Reb Brown with his Captain America motorcycle helmet in person as a kid. So that was pretty awesome for me. But never actually saw the movie on TV until years later, and boy, is it bad. But still, I've always had a kind of a connection to Cap for different reasons. And the character itself is, like I said, profound because of the man at a time aspect, but so symbolic of the country. And so following all the adventures of him over the years has been great. There have been numerous classic runs, but I'm really glad they reintroduced him this way with the ultimate retcon where he had gone away, whereas that didn't actually happen in the comics.
Right. And of course that would get explained later and touched on a number of times. I think it's also interesting when they do, and we'll move on from Captain in a sec, but when they do get him into Tales of Suspense in his own strip, they almost immediately start telling Golden Age flashback stories. So again, Avengers really is the only place you get to see Captain America in the modern era interacting with his team. So big, important stuff. Speaking of big, important stuff, there is one major character introduction in 1964. For the most part, like we said, supporting cast, villains, shoring up the team. But the big intro is, of course, the man without fear, Matt Murdock, Daredevil, who gets his own series, written by Stan Lee, first issue drawn by Bill Everett, creator of the Submariner, with some assists from Steve Ditko, and then art chores pass over to Steve Orlando. Kirby's only on the covers here, and it's interesting. My take on Daredevil is, this is once again, to me, Daredevil is the ultimate kind of also-ran concept of the Silver Age, in the sense that I think they wanted another Spider-Man, another kind of put-upon solo hero, who I think where you see the most Spider-Man aspect is in his costumed identity. You see the wisecracking, kind of just having a good time out there, Daredevil. I think what's interesting about Daredevil is that they had, again, the building blocks of a good character. They had the building blocks of what would eventually work for other writers. And that's that Matt Murdock is a tragic figure. He's a street level, probably the darkest of all the early Marvel heroes. I mean, the fact that he loses his sight, the horrible thing that happens to his father, which they're very explicit about showing, grows up without a mother. The law aspect immediately grounds him and makes him more of an adult than a lot of the other characters. The fact that he is a lawyer, and the fact that that's very interesting. The fact that he's basically the only Marvel character who is fighting for justice in both his civilian and his costumed identities. Where I think they stumble with Daredevil, because I think all that stuff is good. It's a really good, he has a great origin, great powers. Even his supporting cast, I like Karen Page and Foggy Nelson more than, say, Pepper Potts and Happy Hogan, even though a lot of them were interchangeable at this point. Where I think they stumble with Daredevil is that they tried to go, like I said, with the Spider-Man formula, where you have a tragic, relatable secret identity, really put upon. And then the contrast is when Spider-Man gets out there, he's cracking wise and kind of, joking with everything. But that worked for Spider-Man. I think with Daredevil, we're going to see that he doesn't really click until he becomes the more self-serious, kind of street fighting, grounded character. You could argue, of course, that Mark Waid more recently did a little bit of a brighter Daredevil, but if you really look closely at those Mark Waid issues, I think he still had an edge to him that Spider-Man doesn't have. At the end of the day, Spider-Man is a kid. He's a teenager trying to make it in a world where he's basically, as I said last episode, fighting a bunch of old men, and trying to survive in this place where he's overmatched. And Spider-Man's defense mechanism is to make jokes. I think by contrast, Matt Murdock is very much an adult. He has an adult job. He's been through tragedy. He's survived. More than anything, he's tough. Like, he's this. They obviously, I don't think they don't hone in on the whole Irish Catholic thing early on, but you get to it eventually that he's this tough Irish Catholic kid from the streets who has been through a lot and has kind of refined himself. And I think they needed to get away from, the bright yellow costume and the wisecracks and everything. So Daredevil to me, again, I know I'm talking a lot, but
no, it's fine.
Daredevil to me, out the gate, is a half-created concept. I think it's one of the few times where usually the costumed hero is the easy one to get, and the secret identity is a little tougher. With Daredevil, I think that Stan and his collaborators created a great civilian identity in Matt Murdock. I really think he's a compelling character right from the start. And I think Daredevil was less interesting. I think Daredevil was the one who needed some tweaking.
Well,
I don't know. What are your thoughts, Todd?
I think there needs to be more of a contrast in the personalities. When Peter goes to Spider-Man, he is in the moment, completely there, cracking wise, having the time of his life. To me, in this book, you look at Matt versus Daredevil, he's only not smiling in one panel. Literally, the only panel he doesn't have a smile or a smirk is right after his dad dies, and then Foggy snaps him out of it in one panel. So, I mean, that is leaving years of storytelling there for us to pick up on down the road. But yeah, like you said, the bones are there, and certainly Frank Miller fixes Daredevil to me more than you could have ever imagined once you're reading this issue. It's fine. The art especially is very different compared to everything we've seen so far. So, and it's effective, but it is a little dated at times in the cartoonish aspect of things. But the character himself, there's not enough of a contrast between the way he is as Matt versus the way he is as Daredevil at this point. And powers wise, he's kind of a lot like Spider-Man too. The same kind of thing. How many lawyers do you think were reading this, or people aspiring to be in criminal justice as a kid?
And just shaking their heads.
Yeah.
Just going like, what the hell? No, I don't think I don't think there was a huge legal audience. It's interesting. We talk about how, obviously Spider-Man was such a relatable character because a lot of teenagers were reading the books. I don't think you had as many lawyers necessarily picking up Daredevil. But I mean, the thing is, they don't shy away from the Spider-Man comparisons either. If you look at the covers of these early Daredevil issues, they say, from the guys who brought you Spider-Man. And they even have Spider-Man on the cover, like kind of welcoming people in, saying like, oh, this is my buddy, this is my sidekick. And I think they did Daredevil a disservice out the chute by not trying to make him his own individual. Like he had his own lane to drive in, and they just wouldn't give it to him. They were like,
right.
All right. It was almost like they flinched. They got scared at the last second. They're like, oh, we have this really cool, dark, interesting concept. I don't know if people will buy that. Let's make him a lot more like Spider-Man. Let's kind of graft some Spider-Man characteristics on him, just to play it a little safe. And I think, like you said, it's not, Frank Miller is going to come along 20 years later and take the stuff that, again, that Stan put there from the start.
Right.
A lot of the tragedy, and make it work. I'd even argue that before that, there's some good Daredevil stuff in the 70s by Denny O'Neil and others who kind of start to realize what Matt Murdock could be. But yeah, obviously slip of the tongue. Miller made it work. Bendis would later make it work. And yeah, I was there. But I think, it's honestly one of those times where I really think if Stan had more confidence, which is crazy because when do we ever talk about Stan Lee lacking confidence? But if he had more confidence in this concept he came up with in Daredevil, I think Daredevil could have been a hit a lot sooner.
Well, I mean, apart from all the other characters who appeared in anthology series first. He's given a push here in his own issue, much like the X-Men. X-Men were kind of like, at the first, they weren't a pure clone of FF, but the influence was certainly there at the very beginning, before they evolved into more of their own thing. And here, I don't know if this was it Martin Goodman, Stan's cousin?
His uncle.
Yeah, his uncle saying, okay, well, we need another hit here. Let's keep building this. So try to make it as Spider-Man-y as it can without being a direct clone. Boy, Jack Kirby never quite got the look of Spider-Man's mask right, did he?
No, he never did.
I love Jack Kirby, but that
boy.
Same thing with the Amazing Fantasy cover he did, the design. So, yeah, I wish from the get-go it was a little bit more different. Another thing about Spider-Man with his problems, he was always kind of back to status quo at the end, and here Daredevil's dad is always going to be gone, and it wasn't his fault, though. It's not like his personal responsibility.
Of course, and that makes him different from Peter Parker.
Mm-hmm. So he's not as tragic to me, other than he's more of a victim here, whereas Spider-Man's all about responsibility. Daredevil you could see more as a revenge type character.
We'll talk more about Daredevil in the future. In the far future, he'll become a much more important character. Daredevil's an interesting one to analyze, because I do think, and also, as we talked a little bit about on the last stage of the last Masterclass episode, Daredevil was a production problem. You guys alluded to it, the fact that Bill Everett was drawing it and was not necessarily getting things done on time. But I said in the last episode that Daredevil got delayed. He got jumped out of 63 into 64, and that's kind of where Avengers came from, was to replace Daredevil on the schedule. But yeah, Daredevil is just this weird snake-bitten character from the start. And I'm looking forward to getting into the good stuff with Daredevil down the line. Let's touch about something you just mentioned. You just mentioned the X-Men. The X-Men, as far as 1964, they are kind of developing. You guys talked about an issue where Professor X pulls one of his infamous disappearing acts, and Cyclops gets more established as the leader. To me, the most interesting aspect of X-Men in 1964 is the introduction of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. Just really great characters, really nuanced. And I think, just the variety of villains here. The idea that you had Toad as this, kind of clingy, creepy-looking guy. Mastermind, who always, skeeved me out.
Yep.
Just this guy who could... Kirby really, really hit it on the head on Mastermind, just making him look like, the last person you want to be associated with. But to me, and I think, history has borne this out, perhaps the most interesting characters introduced are Quicksilver and the Scarlet Witch. Because in an age when comics, both in terms of DC, but also, in terms of Marvel, most of the villains introduced, even if they're complex, like Doctor Doom or Magneto, or some of the Spider-Man villains, you didn't get the conflicted villains who aren't sure they're doing the right thing, but it's kind of like, we have to do this because this is just the situation we're in, We're forced to be villains. And that's something that I think opened up a lot of doors for future characters. I think Quicksilver and the Scarlet Witch were ahead of their time. We'll explore what happens with them in 65. Obviously interesting stuff. The thing I wanted to hit about that I touched on a little bit earlier in the episode is that, well, she is kind of a classic Marvel Silver Age character, and, in the sense that there is some shortcomings of all of Stan's female characters early on, I do think there's a complexity to Scarlet Witch that might be lacking in, Sue Storm, the Wasp, all the supporting characters. I think Jean Grey has a little bit of that complexity too. I think X-Men, for whatever reason, was where Stan really created some great female characters. And you do have the element of her being kind of, the object of Mastermind and Toad's affection and being overprotected by her brother. But again, I think you're seeing the seeds of a really great character here in terms of Scarlet Witch. And I think it's not a mistake that out of all the Brotherhood characters, and even out of all the early X-Men characters, Scarlet Witch is one who ended up in later years breaking out on her own, said multiple solo series, obviously done well on the big screen. But I just think there's something to that character, whether it's the aspect of, she's this exotic foreign character, or the fact that she's conflicted in terms of good and evil, or the fact that she has this overshadowing, overprotective brother who she needs to break free of. But I don't know. I always thought there was a lot to Scarlet Witch, and by extension, the Brotherhood as well.
So what came first, the Doom Patrol's Brotherhood of Evil, or or the X-Men's Brotherhood of Evil Mutants?
There's a lot of, I know as a comics historian, you probably know, there's a lot of argument over not just that, but what came first, the X-Men or
Doom
the Doom
Patrol,
Patrol.
right, misfit team.
I think, and both led by a guy in a wheelchair. A lot of similarities. From what I've always understood, it's not a deliberate knockoff. Anyone I've spoken to have said that it was just really a coincidence. The idea space just being, limited to a certain point. The idea that, Arnold Drake, who created the Doom Patrol, and obviously Stan and Jack creating the X-Men, they were in a limited idea space. But there's a lot to it. The fact that the Doom Patrol and I don't know if at this point, when they introduce the Brotherhood of Evil versus the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, if these guys are having some fun at this point, getting like, oh, we have similar books. We should.
Yeah. Here's my Squadron Sinister. Bad guy teams. the kind of like the intercompany thing.
Yeah. I don't know the full story there, but yeah, no, continue.
I like that we have this anti X-Men team, meaning this this team of not true opposites, but a quantity that each one is hypothetically as interesting as the X-Men themselves are. And you have this evil mentor in Magneto versus the good mentor of Professor X. And it's nice that you have an actual super team. And we see it in the second half of this episode, or next time we get together, we'll talk about another super villain team. But I do like that they wrote Wanda specifically from the beginning, very morally ambiguous, or at least not necessarily a willing villain. She's just kind of here because she was rescued and feels obligated to Magneto.
Exactly.
And Pietro, I don't know how Pietro has been kind of, he's just there to protect her at this point. He'll do what Magneto says, but he's really just there to be this shield for Wanda. I like that they got the characterizations so perfect from the get-go. Mastermind is a total creep. Mm-hmm. Toad is the anti-beast. He's agile, but he's a simpleton and a total flunky for Magneto. His whole existence is to glorify his boss. Blob would work well with them, but they're trying to write him a little bit more independently, so we don't necessarily associate him with this. I have a question. When's the first time we see Magneto with his helmet off?
Good question. I don't know exactly when. I think it's a little while down the line, but I think you got to wonder, because immediately they give him the distinctive white hair,
right?
Which of course Quicksilver always had as well.
Had from the get-go.
You got to wonder how early on they were thinking about making that connection, and how much of that was kind of baked in from the start. I don't know when we see him without his helmet. I don't think it's till, I want to say, somewhere around 66, 67. Because every time you see him now, you see him with the helmet on. So
if it was just a happy accident that these two characters that they introduced, oh boy, wouldn't it make more sense if they were his estranged children? Because I have a hard time not imagining that that's where they were going with it, even at this point. But I don't know that Stan planned that far in advance. But
yeah. No, I'd have to agree with you, because I do think that, I don't know. Yeah, just the idea that he saves these two characters. I don't know. I think Stan had the grand plans he had for Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch, which we'll talk more about next episode. I think these were characters he was kind of thinking big with, which is kind of cool. Just the idea that he seeded them in X-Men and would eventually use them somewhere else. to me, again, is what makes these early Marvel comics stand out. The idea that you can introduce a concept one place and it'll eventually flourish somewhere else. Almost like the more planned version of what they did with the Hulk.
Hulk, exactly.
Where, Hulk was introduced in his own book, but really ended up shining in Avengers and FF. With Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch, they were a great fit in X-Men. I thought they were great in X-Men. But there was more to be done with them down the line. And I agree with you too, Todd. I think it's cool that they had this team, because you get to see the X-Men, early on. They are battling Magneto. They're battling this one guy who's a threat to them. They took on some other less memorable villains, Vanisher, Stranger, Unis the Untouchable. I don't know if he's come in yet or not in the issues we skipped, but and Blob, of course. But this is where the X-Men really find their opposite numbers. And I think there's also something to the fact that the X-Men are fighting an adult Magneto, the same way Spider-Man fought people older than him. This teenage team is fighting this kind of oppressive adult and these other creepy adult characters in Toad and Mastermind. But the most interesting dynamic, as we've discussed, is the fact that there are these other teenagers involved in the mix. And they're not fully evil, because I think Stan had the idea from the jump that we are going to make these guys more relatable, more three-dimensional, and eventually they're going to end up being the stars of the team.
Well, and that was the best heroes that he would write, were relatable and three-dimensional. So let's write villains. Unfortunately, if you write a villain that way too much, they're going to become a good guy. And so
unfortunate or
happy accident. I mean, it looks like planning to me. It looks like a long-term, which is great. Yeah. And I like Scarlet Witch quite a bit. I've always kind of had a love-hate with Quicksilver. Never quite got the character until Peter David's X Factor. Mm-hmm. And boy, those are some great comics if you haven't checked them out. But
absolutely.
Wanda, I think the Byrne and I don't know if it's Byrne and Stern Avengers run, did some amazing stuff with her. She was a supporting character in Doctor Strange. Bendis, of course, another favorite of his in his 90s, 2000s run. So great character. A little different. She evolves quite a bit from being the naive teenager, but she at least is presented as not totally buying into everything that Magneto is saying here. So great character. Great visual design too.
Absolutely. Very unique. Very different. That headdress is just like, where did that come from? Kirby, we talk about a lot of good stuff Kirby did in terms of, big cosmic action, fight scenes, stuff like that. We're going to talk more about a big fight scene he did in the next episode, but sometimes doesn't get enough credit as just a great costume designer. I talked about Captain America's costume being great, but, look at Magneto, look at Scarlet Witch, look at some of the more unique looks that he's doing. He really came to town. And I think, again, it's going to be interesting to follow X-Men, because I don't know how long Stan and Jack are for the book. It's one of the first books they end up kind of turning over some other people, some interesting other people. But I think the revelation for me so far in this little odyssey we're taking into the Marvel age, there's been a few revelations for me, but one is how impressed I am by the original X-Men stuff. This was the thing that I was kind of expecting, much like the Hulk. I was going to be like, all right, well, this didn't work when it started, and it would take, the likes of Len Wein and Chris Claremont and Dave Cockrum and John Byrne to kind of salvage it in the 70s and the 80s. I'm turned around a little on that. I think the X-Men were the original X-Men team, and the original X-Men stories were better than I would have thought they were, just given their place in history.
I think as soon as you see their personalities evolve and you see, the Beast is actually very verbose and different, completely different from the Thing. Scott has a reason for being a brooding loner. Once those characteristics and traits were brought more to the forefront over these couple issues, and remember, this was still bi-monthly, I believe.
Yeah.
So
I believe you're right.
You have more time as a reader to percolate with these and think about these things, and even as a writer, you have more time. He has more time to stretch this out.
Yeah.
Yeah, that book kind of course corrected. Not that issue 1 is bad, because it had actually a really good story with Magneto, but the characters
The
become
personalities
much more
aren't there yet.
Yeah,
they're a fantastic. As you guys nailed it perfectly in your first episode, or your second episode rather. They're a Fantastic Four retread in the first issue. There's some interesting stuff there. Magneto's a great villain. Professor X is an interesting character. Once they get the personalities down, X-Men starts to sing in a way that I was not expecting. And it'll even get better, because they are going to encounter more villains. They are going to get their own costumes at some point. And of course, the big thing hanging over X-Men is at some point they're going to bring in the metaphor of mutants as being other, as being minorities. And that's of course a big milestone. But
why do you think they graduated the X-Men at the beginning of issue 7?
It's a great question, and it's something that actually, when you guys were covering it and when we read it, I didn't realize they graduated so quickly. I don't know. I don't have the inside track on that, other than the sense that I wonder if they didn't want to experiment with them being out on their own, kind of more adult characters. Again, I've talked to you guys about the fact that Stan Lee, not a fan of the teenage sidekick. So I almost wonder if this is an extension of that philosophy with Stan, thinking we've got one character who's a student in Spider-Man, but interestingly enough, you will see Spider-Man graduate high school in pretty short order. He doesn't stay there for too long, whereas some other characters in comics literally will stay in high school for decades. I think Stan just liked the idea of moving characters along and maturing them. Why did they graduate so quickly? I'm not sure, because I did kind of think, I've always associated with X-Men the same way the Fantastic Four are a family and the Avengers are an all-star team. The X-Men are a school. That's kind of their identification. So it's interesting that they graduated so quickly. I'm going to dig into it a little and see if I can come up with an answer for that, because I think that's a really interesting question.
Sounds like a plan.
Sounds like a plan, man. And we have covered a lot of good stuff today. We've got more 1964 to go, guys, and we're going to get to that. We've still got some big Fantastic Four stuff, Spider-Man aplenty, and then the latest installments of Doctor Strange, as well as a little bit more Avengers. So we'll talk more about that. Todd, until next time, where can people find you online?
On Twitter at Todd Weber Guitar. Lots of hot basketball takes there.
Yeah.
Sacramento Kings love.
Yes.
You can also talk to me on a Place to Be Nation Comics page on Facebook. So just search in the Facebook search bar, Place to Be Nation Comics. We'll add you to the group. Nobody is denied unless you're a Russian spam bot. And even then, I'll spend some time with your profile and we'll see. But
I thought you were going to say Russian spy, because that's just where you guys are in terms of Marvel. You're very apprehensive of the Red Menace.
Yeah, and that's it. Every she's a red commie. Oh my god.
Yeah, guys, you can also find me on the Place to Be Nation Comics Facebook page, and I am on Twitter as @Ben J Morse. I'm on Instagram @Ben Morse 882. And Todd, I'm looking forward to the rest of this conversation, and we should be out in pretty short order. I think you and I are going to try to set up a time to talk hopefully later this week. So we'll get to it. Of course, if you guys are looking for more of me talking about comics, I should mention that this Friday, June 22nd, I am going to be speaking about comics at the TEDx UNLV event. If you're a local Las Vegas and you want to try to get tickets, they're still available. But if you want to watch it streaming, it's going to be on, you can go to unlv.edu/TEDxUNLV, and all the information on my TED Talk is there. And I don't know if we'll talk before or after I do that, Todd. So maybe I'll give a recap next episode, or maybe I won't. But there you go. That's what I got coming up this week.
Excellent. Good luck. You're going to kill it.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. And thank you, Todd, for being on this episode of Marvel Age Masterclass. Thank you to everyone who listened. Like I said, we will be back in short order with the second part of 1964. Until then, please send us all your comments, questions, critiques, etc. Until next time, class dismissed.
Promotional consideration paid for by the following.
Hey, pro wrestling announcer Kevin Kelly here. I want to make sure you are all subscribed to all the great feeds here at Place to Be Nation. It's really easy to do. Just head to iTunes or your preferred podcatcher app today and search and subscribe to the Place to Be Nation wrestling feed, which of course includes the full archives of the Kevin Kelly Show, the Place to Be Nation pod feed, and the Pro Wrestling Only feed. Subscribe, listen, and then rate us and leave feedback today. And be sure to give Justin your true thoughts. I mean, don't hold back. After all, he is kind of a jerk. Just listen to Scott.
Place to Be Nation's JT Rosero and Chad Campbell here. We want to let you know that we have a ton of great podcasts available to you on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and PlaceToBeNation.com. We offer them to you on two great feeds. On the Place to Be Nation Wrestling feed, we bring you the Mothership, the Place to Be podcast, along with Main Event, Survey Says, the Monday Night Wars, and our monthly pay-per-view reaction show, as well as Jeff Learns Wrestling. In addition to these full-length shows, we also deliver special network podcasts and pod blasts on topics old and new.
Over on the Pro Wrestling Only feed, we dive deep inside the wrestling business with a stacked army of experts leading the way. The feed features potpourri shows such as This Week in Wrestling, Greetings from Allentown, Match of the Week podcast, and the Military Industrial Suplex. We also have shows that focus intently on certain topics like Through the Years, Worldcast, Strong Style History, Strong Style Story, and Mount Olympus. Plus, the feed has the full archives of legendary shows like Titans of Wrestling, Where the Big Boys Play, Letters from Center Stage, and Letters from Kayfabe, plus much more. And on our very popular Place to Be Nation Pop podcast feed, we offer such great shows as Talkin' Pop, the Glenn Butler Podcast Hour Spectacular, NBA Team, PTBN Play, Sunday Groove, Breaking Balls, and Lucha Undead.
As well as a veritable podcast heaven for comics fans.
With the hard-traveling fanboys, Sellers Points, Todd Weber's Conversations, Geek and Sassy, and Marvel Age Podcasts.
You can find all of these current shows, plus archives of our past podcasts, including The Kevin Kelly Show, as well by subscribing to both feeds on iTunes. And while there, be sure to rate and leave feedback today. All these shows, plus others, available at PlaceToBeNation.com, where we cover pro wrestling, sports, movies, comics, plus in-depth stretch projects and more. Be sure to support our site by using PlaceToBeNation.com/Amazon when doing your online shopping, and download our free PTB Vintage Vault Refresh ebooks via the links on our site. We also want to thank our friends at Boneheads Wing Bar in West Warwick, Rhode Island, and Fall River, Massachusetts, and thehistoryofwrestling.com. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Tumblr as well. PlaceToBeNation.com, the only place to be in your pop culture world.